I wanted to do something a little different, and not only make an autumn list, but one specifically focusing on the end of fall. Many make the mistake of viewing November as a useless and dreary month, but it's still a part of fall and has, I find, an atmosphere of its own. A moody, wet, melancholy vibe, which I think the books on this list perfectly capture. With Halloween over, these books aren't as paranormal, fantastical, or scary as those included on my earlier lists, but they're still disturbing, psychological, and strange, and in keeping with autumn as a whole. As far as genres are concerned, I tried to focus on mysteries, gothics, dark academia, psychological thrillers, and dark romance. In the earlier part of autumn, I gravitate more towards supernatural novels and dark fairy tales, being more focused on fantasy and outright horror. But these genres are autumnal too, and pair best, I think, with almost bald trees, thick mist, and early nights. Two of the genres literally have the word dark in them, making these suitable for pitch black evenings and days where it feels like perpetual twilight. Without further ado, here are 10 books you should read in November. First off, I want to introduce you to the underrated masterpiece that is The Tenant of Wildfall Hall. The Bronte sisters as a whole are respected, their canon celebrated, but Anne, who wrote only this book, is overlooked. When people talk about the best Bronte novels, they discuss either Emily's Wuthering Heights or Charlotte's Jane Eyre, leaving Anne out of the conversation entirely. But this novel, in my opinion, is every bit as worthy of discussion as the other two. Though it has a gothic feel in keeping with a Bronte novel, presenting us with a mysterious woman and her unknown past, as well as a troubled love story, Anne has a voice all her own. Despite how groundbreaking their own novels were, challenging cultural norms, Anne's sisters urged her not to publish this novel because it was too shocking at the time. The Tenant of Wildfall Hall isn't just a mystery, it's a searing feminist commentary. If Jane Eyre revealed how trapped women felt in a society where men ran the world, this novel exposed the outright abuses they were subjected to. The Tenant of Wildfall Hall follows a woman who, being abused by her husband, must flee, an act which was illegal at the time. Hunted by her husband and the law itself, she is forced to hide, assuming an alternative identity that she might not be locked away. At the time of publication, your husband, if you married, essentially owned you. Divorce was unheard of, and a man could do no wrong. A man who abused his wife wasn't seen favorably, but in a system where women were little more than slaves, there was no recourse for women if men did abuse their power. The titular tenant is subjected to verbal and physical abuse, and repeatedly humiliated by her husband. Marrying him with the intention of reforming him, she soon learns that you can't, in fact, change him. And after dealing with his infidelity, his drinking, and his intrusion into her privacy, not to mention his attempts to literally entrap her, she can't handle it anymore. Anne's novel called for true reform, highlighting how the limits placed on women left them vulnerable. Not only lonely and unfulfilled as Jane was in Jane Eyre, but disrespected, even attacked, in situations where husbands were given free rein. Given how common spousal abuse remains today, one can only imagine the horror of literally being forbidden from leaving a situation that is mentally damaging at best or life-endangering at worst. In an age where women continue to be belittled and stripped of their rights, disrespected and silenced, this book remains relevant and is just as powerful and important as Jane Eyre or Wuthering Heights. While mystery isn't my go-to, I've dabbled in the genre, and reading these, I was struck immediately by Sherlock's character. He's a genius, but he also lacks tact sometimes. He isn't intentionally rude, he just tells it like it is, focusing more on details than feelings. His is a logical mind, divorced from emotion and its constraints. And this stands out even more in a series written during a time when people lived for propriety. Obviously, the mysteries are clever and ingenious too. And it's fun seeing the ways in which Holmes solves his cases, utilizing everything from his vast knowledge of niche topics to his use of disguises. Arthur Conan Doyle's books must be credited with kicking off many of the tropes we enjoy today, like the aforementioned disguise trick. But his characters were likewise ahead of their time. As someone who has dabbled in the mystery genre, I've found the genre has some of the best character writing that I've seen. That's understandable, given many mystery stories run for several shorts or novels. If you have to go on multiple adventures with a given protagonist, they need to be interesting. Reading this, though, makes me realize how many of the archetypes we love are owed to Holmes. I'm a huge fan of Wednesday. I have a soft spot for introverted, intelligent, and socially awkward characters. Wednesday is often rude by societal standards, not because she's setting out to hurt anyone, but because she's focused, arguably to a fault, on her own interests. Fixated on her writing and the murder mystery plaguing Nevermore, she simply lacks interest in making friends or participating in social events. As an introvert myself and an autistic to boot, I relate to characters like this. That's not to say I'm rude to my friends or lack a social life, but these are my favorite characters to follow. Because, like them, I feel like I'm on the fringes of society, but largely content to be so, comforting myself with various niche passions. That's why I'm sorry I slept on Doyle's work for so long, because without Sherlock Holmes, we wouldn't have Wednesday Addams, or any of the other taciturn, asocial geniuses we've come to love. Having watched part of the show with Benedict Cumberbatch, I can safely say he captures the character beautifully, despite the adaptation being modernized. Holmes is logical, socially awkward, and a drug addict. He isn't someone you'd necessarily want to hang out with, but he's fascinating to follow, whether it's the clever ways in which he solves his cases or the unusual way he interacts even with those closest to him. From the first page, I was laughing because Holmes' first comment on reuniting with Watson is to remark that Watson has gained 7 pounds. It would be a rude thing to say now, let alone 100 years ago. But for him, it's just a neutral observation, like the number of steps leading up to his house, or the condition of a suspect's clothes. Mysteries are always perfect for cloudy autumn days, being simultaneously cozy and moody. And I can't think of a better recommendation than this collection of Sherlock shorts, which serves both as a good introduction for new readers and a treat for returning fans. For those looking for something short and sweet, it's a good first step into mystery as a whole, a genre that pairs nicely with gloomy weather and a warm blanket. Personally, I've always preferred to read Jane Austen's work during the spring. with many readers favoring her novels in the summer during Jane Austen July. But Northanger Abbey has the distinction of being her only Gothic novel. Of course, Northanger Abbey is a parody of the genre, making fun of its pitfalls in a tongue-in-cheek way. The Gothic genre was the literary equivalent of our Romantasy, being simultaneously popular and maligned. Often consumed by women, it was seen as lesser literature, and Austen had her own critiques of the genre. In Northanger Abbey, Austen cleverly picks apart and subverts the genre. Though a parody, this means the book, nevertheless, has the trappings of the genre. A love story, a mysterious house, and a tragic past. But all the mysteries and paranoia is grounded in reality and painted with a light-hearted, comical, and clever brush. We follow Cathy Morland, a huge lover of Gothic books, who runs into trouble when she fails to separate fiction from reality. Supposing herself the heroine of a Gothic tale, misunderstandings and awkward confrontations ensue. But I find her character likable and relatable, despite her naive nature. As someone who loves books, including those in maligned genres, and who giggled with her friends over them, I relate to Cathy. Northanger Abbey, like most of Austen's novels, is fun, but told through a Gothic veneer, making it a book which complements the moody weather while offering a much-needed escape from it. When discussing Daphne du Maurier, most people think first of Rebecca. And while Rebecca is one of my favorite novels, I prefer to read it closer to Halloween. Having already lauded Rebecca as a book you should read during spooky season, I want to highlight Jamaica Inn as an ideal November pick. This novel is as dreary and gothic as they come. We have a vulnerable heroine, men of uncertain intentions, desolate landscapes, tragic backstories, and an isolated location. The story doesn't take place in a lavish manor or opulent castle, though, but in a dingy inn where the proprietor, our heroine's uncle, is engaged in mysterious but no doubt dubious activities. The reveal regarding his crimes is shocking enough, to say nothing of the psychological torment he subjects his wife to. But he's not even the scariest character, with a twist villain appearing to terrorize our heroine suitably enough out on the moors. With sinkholes that can be deadly to those who take a wrong step, this location is a character unto itself. Atmospheric and foreboding, this is a slow burn suspense novel perfect for late fall. Shocking and disturbing without falling into the horror genre. Plus, if you love to read the Brontes this time of year, du Maurier's writing is reminiscent of their work, exploring themes of womanhood and isolation while featuring amoral characters in rich, moody settings. Coming back to the mystery novel, we have And Then There Were None. If you were to ask me what novel I loved outside of my preferred genres, it would have to be this one. If any mystery writer rivals Arthur Conan Doyle, it's Agatha Christie. I've read a number of her books, including several Poirot mysteries, but this was the one which stayed with me. One of her standalone novels, this book follows 10 people who are invited to an island, only to find upon arrival that they're to be held accountable for the crimes they committed in the past. Unlike most, the murderer in this novel isn't after revenge or money. They simply want justice. Having all escaped legal convictions for crimes the killer feels they must be punished for, they are killed one by one, their deaths represented by 10 figurines, which likewise vanish as their numbers dwindle. This novel is a slow burn, with the last remaining characters having to contend with their inevitable deaths. I loved the murderer's unique motive, their way of hiding in plain sight, and Christie's brilliant way of diverting your suspicions. If you fall for all the red herrings, you'll never guess who the killer is until the reveal. Plus, the deaths themselves are creative, and there's plenty of fascinating backstory to be had as the skeletons in each of these characters' closets are rattled. Like many of the authors on this list, Shirley Jackson is known for her strange and subversive fiction. But The Bird's Nest was subversive in itself, being, despite its thriller trappings, an unusually nuanced exploration of mental health. While the book is still arguably a sensationalized story, in keeping with Jackson's usual work, it doesn't outright villainize the patient, a rarity at the time. Instead, half the horror comes from how displaced the heroine feels. As she loses control of her identity, her very self, the reader is unnerved by the protagonist's loss of agency. In The Bird's Nest, we deal with a young woman who suffers from multiple personalities, what we now would call dissociative identity disorder, and previously dubbed multiple personality disorder. Given the time the book was written, I was impressed by how accurate it was. It's not a perfect representation. For example, the protagonist suddenly develops this disorder as a teenager, when we now know it has to begin in early childhood. But the presence of trauma in her past, her sudden loss of time, and the way the personalities manifest as extensions of herself are impressively accurate for the time period during which the novel was published. Moreover, Jackson herself didn't want the book to be marketed as a thriller. Though the protagonist has one personality which causes trouble and commits wild acts, she's presented overall in a sympathetic light. Outside of one violent personality, she's not presented as a monster, but as a victim. And the other characters within the book are no less interesting, suffering from their own flaws and quirks. It's clear Jackson either did a lot of research or had good intuition. And if you want something that feels out of left field, or which is strange and melancholy without being horrific, this is a unique but forgotten novel from a master storyteller. I haven't read many dark academia novels, but wanting to include something from that category on this list, I had to go with Naomi Novik's Scholomance trilogy. Overall, I had fun with these. I recommended this book on my Books to Read If You Love Harry Potter video, as it's what you'd get if, in going to Hogwarts, you were trapped there and everything wanted to kill you. It's essentially what would happen if all of Harry's classes took place in the Dark Forest and hundreds of fluffies were just loose in the corridors. Every day is the Battle of Hogwarts for these kids. And we follow the snarky social outcast Elle Higgins, whose magic eclipses those of her peers, but whose low status makes it inaccessible most of the time. Despite being one of the most powerful mages, she's the most vulnerable because, to put it into video game terms, she's chronically running out of mana. These books can be a bit expositional, in my opinion, and sometimes their target demographic is unclear, being written in a simplistic way but featuring very adult content. But they're fun overall, and if you don't mind a YA writing style, they're dark and inventive. There's plenty of magic and action, and the monsters are simultaneously creative and scary, killing kids in colorful but twisted ways. One of my favorite elements are the maw mouse. So dangerous because they can't be killed. The horror comes not from their invincibility, but from what happens to you if you're swallowed by one. Maw mouse don't kill you. Instead, they absorb you, and your consciousness goes on in perpetuity while they slowly melt you into themselves. They're gruesome and disgusting, and I love it. But it gets better, or worse, because the way in which they were created is still more horrible. But you'll have to read the books yourself to discover how. The enclaves upon which the magic community rely are dying. Think what would happen if Hogwarts lost its magic overnight. No one knows why these bastions of power are going dark without warning, but it falls to Elle, who has few allies in a death trap, to discover why, all while trying to stay alive and graduate. With the next few entries on this list, I am going to cheat a bit, because I haven't read these novels yet, but I wanted to include them because they feel very November-ish to me, and I'll be attempting to read them this year. To begin with, we have Alchemized. I had reservations about this book before purchasing it. Though I'm a fan of dark fantasy and of Harry Potter, which inspired this novel, I don't generally read dark romance. Having done research, there is one plot point which may be iffy for me when I reach it, as consent within a romantic relationship is important to me. But my curiosity overcame my concerns. Ultimately, I want to form my own opinion, rather than rely on others. For my part, I'm intrigued by the dark fantasy aspects of the novel, and am choosing to view the book through the same lens I'd view a horror, a gothic, or a thriller. I'm expecting a gritty story of psychological torment paired with troubled anti-heroes, and we'll see how my chosen lens affects my perception of the book's more controversial moments. I have additional videos planned where I'll be discussing both the uproar surrounding this book and the dark romance genre as a whole. And those will likely come out before I've started or finished this book. But I didn't want to wade into the discourse without reading it for myself. Elements of the synopsis reminded me of Shatter Me, which I personally loved. And at this point, I'm expecting Harry Potter meets Haunting Adeline. But we'll see. This book is basically to Harry Potter what 50 Shades of Grey is to Twilight, so I can't pretend I'm not curious, especially after the passionate discourse from both fans and haters. From the depressing premise to the rain-colored cover, this book also screams November to me. Also in the vein of the depressing, disturbing, and controversial, we have Flowers in the Attic. There's no way around it. This book is fucked up. And that's exactly why I want to read it. If the Lannisters were quadruplets instead of twins, and they were locked up in an attic by a psycho mother, this is what you'd end up with. This novel deals with content many readers find taboo, to put it lightly. If you were offended by a certain thing that was teased but didn't actually happen in Cassandra Clare's first novels, well, spoiler alert, it does happen in V.C. Andrews' infamous story. As someone who's read a lot of Angela Carter and Anne Rice and enjoyed the likes of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, I'm no stranger to disturbing content. I have a macabre streak, and this book feels suitable for autumn, but less in a spooky, witchy way and more in a psychological horror way. I like reading books about psychologically tormented characters who make questionable choices. Hence, many of the choices on this list. Last but not least, we have Anne Radcliffe's The Count of Udolpho. Despite being some mix of Stephen King and Sarah J. Maas during her time in terms of popularity, Anne Radcliffe has been largely forgotten. However, to bookworms who obsessively research literature and fans of the Gothic genre, she's come back into the conversation. In fact, this novel is one of those which Kathy gushes over within Northanger Abbey. Anne Radcliffe's decline is reflected in Northanger Abbey, as the Gothic genre, weighed by the same tired tropes, was becoming washed up. Readers were getting burned out on the genre. But if Radcliffe's books now read as hackneyed, it's only because so many authors copied her rather than the other way around. When Radcliffe first came on the scene, her work was fresh, original, and inventive. Before everyone rushed to copy her, the way they now rush to copy vampires and fairies, no one had ever read anything quite like her books. By today's standards, they might be overwritten, but I personally enjoy lengthy descriptions of landscapes and flowery prose. I really like to picture everything when I'm reading, because it immerses me in the story and the world the author has created. Being a fan of Anne Rice, Tolkien, and George R.R. Martin, I hope to have more patience for Radcliffe's reputed verbosity. At this point, I feel that a truly classic Gothic, one of the progenitors of the genre, might feel fresh again, being divorced as it is from our reality and sensibilities. It's been too long since I've lost myself in a piece of classic literature, and as a fan of the Gothic, I'd be remiss not to read one of the iconic stories that started it all. In this book, a young woman is whisked away by a charming man of dubious character to an isolated castle, and that's all I need to know. I hope to be as transported as Kathy Morland was, losing myself in a cold and isolated setting while the rain lashes my house. For me, November is an important part of autumn, offering an atmosphere of its own. Fall doesn't stop just because Halloween is over, and I wanted to recommend books that reflected the season beyond the pumpkins and the witches. From dark academia to psychological horror, mysteries to dark romance, all of these books capture the moodier aspect of autumn, the dark, foreboding, and unnerving portion of the season, when the sun vanishes at afternoon's end or disappears entirely behind brooding clouds. Like November, many of these books are dreary, unsettling, and unpredictable, complementing the weather without. Are you reading anything specific to celebrate the season or escape it? If you're not ready to leave autumn behind, I discuss all the books I read from the end of August until the end of October in my autumn wrap-up video. Thank you for watching and happy reading!